When you manage your projects in Notion, you can use progress bars to visualize your progress. Let's look at how to create these visual progress bars using formulas. And if you're new to formulas in Notion, you might want to start with a post on Notion VIP called Meet Notion's Formula Property. That has an included video, and we'll link to that within the description of this video. So creating visual progress bars is going to require 4 different Notion functions. Let's take a quick look at those functions. The first is the if function. So if you go to the Notion formula cheat sheet on Notion VIP, which I'll also link to from the description of this video, you'll see that it takes 3 different arguments. The first argument is an expression that evaluates to either true or false. So typically for this argument, you're going to be comparing 2 different values. And then the second argument are the operations that you want to take if the first argument evaluates to true. And then the third argument is the operation that you want to perform if the first argument evaluates to false. So as I said, that first argument is going to be an expression that returns true or false, and typically it's going to compare 2 values. So to make that comparison, you'll often use comparison operators. So if you scroll back up to the top of the cheat sheet and then scroll down to the sub menu, there's an option for comparison operators, and there you'll find 6 of Notion's common comparison operators. So these are likely be familiar to you, but you can compare whether 2 values are equal, whether they're unequal, whether one is greater than the other, less than the other, greater than or equal to the other, or less than or equal to the other. So let's take a quick look at the if function using these comparison operators. So here I've created a little bit of a sandbox area for us to work with. And within this formula property here, we can begin our if function with the if keyword and open it with the parenthesis. So the first argument is going to be that expression that evaluates to true or false. So in one of the simplest examples, we can compare 2 and 2. So we'll type 2, and then the equals operator is the double equal sign, and then we'll use another 2. So this first argument is asking, does 2 equal 2? And then the second argument is going to be the operation to perform if that expression is true. So let's just return the string yes. And then the third argument is the operation to perform if that first expression returns false. So let's just say no. And then complete our formula. And you'll see here that we have 2 yeses, because in both iterations of the formula, it's comparing 2 and 2, which is always going to be, of course, true. But typically, these values that you compare are going to be references to other properties. So we can turn this first 2 into a reference to the item property, and we can ask whether it equals the text string item 1 and confirm. So now we have a yes and a no. So this is of course yes, because item 1 is this text string item 1, and of course item 2 is not equal to the text string item 1, so we have a no here. Now, we were using our comparison operator here for this first expression, but in the case of checkboxes, these are just representations of the values of true or false. And because this first argument just needs a true or a false returned, we can just reference the checkbox property without using a comparison operator, and that will give us what we need. So if we reference the checkbox property, again, no need for comparison operators. If the checkbox is unchecked, it's going to return false, and if it's checked, it's going to return true. So here we have no and yes, because this box is unchecked and this one is checked. And if we were to switch these, you can see that the value of the formula property is switched as well. So the second function that we're going to be using for our visual progress bars is the slice function. And what slice does is it takes a text string and it takes a starting point and an end point. So, and then returns a substring of that original text string. So those are the three arguments: the original string, and then the starting point, and then the end point. And you don't have to specify the end point. It'll just run to the end of that original string if you exclude it. So when you specify the starting point and the end point, you want to keep in mind that the first character of the original string is going to be at the 0 mark. It's not going to be at the 1 mark. So you're going to want to count accordingly. So let's take a quick look at slice. We'll start with slice, and we'll just use a random text string. I'm in the mountains. So that's our first argument, is the original string. And then the second argument is going to be the starting point of the substring that we want to return. So let's just start it at the 10 mark. And then the third argument is going to be the end point of our substring. So let's just call it 19. And then we'll conclude our formula. And you can see that we've returned the substring mountain, which begins at the 10 mark and ends at the 19 mark. So that's slice. We're also going to use the format function, and you'll recall that Notion is particular about the input types that you supply as arguments. So you want to make sure that you're using a date when needed, a number when needed, a true or false value when needed, or a string when needed. So in our case, we're going to need to convert a number to a string, and you'll see why. But what we can do is, with the format function, we can input a number. So let's just say 12, for example. And it's going to return that number as a string. We know it's a string because it's aligned to the left now, and it can then be appended to other text strings. If we were to just supply 12 as our formula, you can see it's aligned to the right, meaning that it's a number. And then the fourth function that we're going to use is the round function. And all that does is it rounds a decimal number to the closest integer. So if we were to start our round function with the round keyword and then supply a decimal as its only argument, let's just pick a random decimal, 12.2, then we can see that we're given the integer of 12. If we were to do 12.7, then it rounds up to 13. So let's move on here to our progress bars. So when you want to visualize your progress, you're going to need to visualize the percentage towards your total completion. So you're going to need a property within your database that represents the completion toward that total. You're going to need a percentage of completion. So we have a hidden percentage property here. We don't need to see it after our visual progress bar is created, but as we create our progress bar, we're going to want to see it. So here you can see that we have our percentage property, and the way that this is calculated is we have another property for total units, and then we have a property for completed units. So for each item in this database, we specify how many do we need to complete in order for the project to be 100% complete, and then we specify in completed units how many we've completed towards that total. So an example might be a yearbook photographer who has a list of classes that he needs to photograph. And for each class, he might have total students in that class. And then as he photographs those students, he might count up the completed students. And with that, he can then have this formula property that divides the completed students by the total students to return the percentage of completed students for each class. So that's one way of creating this percentage property. Now there's virtually endless other ways, but one other way that's particularly useful in Notion is if you have a projects database and then you have a tasks database that includes the tasks required to complete those projects, you can link the projects to the tasks associated with it. And then you can create a roll-up property that automatically calculates the percentage of tasks that are complete by using a checkbox property within that tasks database. So we won't get into the details of that now. We'll probably cover them in another video. But if you are familiar with relation properties and roll-up properties, then you can tinker with that and see how you can use linked tasks and projects to calculate percentage progress automatically. So I will just show that percent property here, which you can see is a roll-up property. So before we actually write our visual progress bar formula, we want to take a quick look at these characters used here. So for each progress bar, you're going to want to determine the types of creative character that you want to use. And for that creative character, you're going to want there to be a version that's solid and then empty or filled or unfilled. And so we have three examples here. One is solid circles and empty circles. The other is solid stars and empty stars. And then the third is shades. We have dark shades and light shades. So the darker versions are going to represent the progress, and the lighter versions or the unfilled versions are going to be the representing the percentage that is yet to be completed. So with that, we're ready to compose the formula for representing these progress bars. Really, the most important part, again, is going to be to establish your percentage property, because these progress bars are just going to be a visual representation of that percentage property. So let's erase what we already have in place here. It's going to be helpful when you're composing these more complex formulas to compose them in a text editor. And within Notion, these code blocks actually serve as excellent places to compose these formulas. It allows you to create line breaks and indentations to see exactly how the formula is working. That helps to troubleshoot any errors that you may need to resolve. And then after you can compose them within these blocks, you can paste them within the URL bar of your browser and then copy them again to paste them into your formula property, which is going to eliminate those line breaks and indentations in a way that that will be friendly to that formula property. So we're going to start first by creating our solid characters. So this is really going to be kind of three pillars. First, we're going to create our solid characters, and then our empty characters, and then the numeric percentage that follows it. So these are just text strings with those three pillars: the solids, the empties, and then the numeric percentage representation. So let's start with the solids. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with that slice property. So we'll type slice and then open it up. And remember, the first argument of the slice property is going to be the larger string that we want to take a segment of. So for this, we're going to enter 10 of our solid characters. In this case, we're just going to use our circles. So I just copied that existing value so I could paste it quickly here. So we have our 10 solid circles. And then we want to specify the starting point of the substring. In this case, it's always going to be the 0 mark. Remember, 0 represents the first character. And then for the ending point, we're going to use our percentage property. And we want that number to be between 1 and 10 because we want to specify the point in this larger string where we want it to end. So what we're going to do is we'll reference that percentage property, progress percent, and we're going to multiply it by 10. So that's going to move the decimal over one place to give us a number between 1 and 10. And then we're going to surround this value in the round function so that it gives us a nice integer. Because otherwise, Notion's always going to round down to determine the number of solids here. So here we have our slice function with 3 arguments. It's got our 10 solids, 0 as the starting index, and then we've multiplied the percentage by 10 and rounded it to determine the ending mark. So then we can close out our slice property, and we can copy this formula here, and if we were to paste it within our formula property, it's going to give us the starting point of our full progress bar. It's going to give us the solids that we want. So I'm just going to undo that here quickly. So now we want to create our empties, and that's going to work much the same way. So I'm going to copy this existing slice function. I'm going to add our concatenation operator, the plus sign, because we're going to want to append the empties to those solids. So I can paste the slice here, and now we want to start with our empties as our original string. So I will paste that value. So here we want to use the difference between 100% and the percent complete. So we're going to subtract that percentage property by 1 and then multiply it by 10 and round it. So we'll add parentheses here for our order of operations. So that's going to give us the empties that we want. We can test that down here by pasting, and you can see here that we have all the empties that we're going to want to add to our solids. So the last part is going to be representing the numeric percentage, and that's just adding a string, the number and the percentage sign, to our solids and to our empties. So it's not as simple as just referencing the percentage property for a few reasons, primarily because this is a string, and remember, you can't just append a number to a string, and that percentage property is of the type number. So what we need to do is convert that percentage property to a string. And remember, we'll do that by using the format function. But first, we're going to need to multiply that percentage property by 100 in order for it to represent the percentage as we want to see it. We want it to be a number between 1 and 100. So we will just copy one of our references to that progress property and then multiply it by 100. And then we will surround it with the round function to eliminate any lingering decimals. And then we can use that format function to convert it to a string so that we don't get a type error. And then the last step is just going to be to add that percentage sign. So if we were to copy this new part here, we can come down to our formula property, paste it, and here we have our percentages. So we've seen each of our individual pillars. Let's copy them all together. And then paste them into our formula property, and there we have our full progress bar. Now what we didn't do is add a space between the empties and the numeric representation. So let's just come back up here to our code block, add that space and another concatenation operator, and we can then copy once again, paste, copy, and then come into our formula property. And that displays it just as we want to see it. So obviously a full understanding of this is going to take some tinkering and some practice. And as you practice, you'll see that you'll see another post on Notion VIP that describes these steps in detail by text. So that'll also be linked within the description of this video. And if you hit any roadblocks, feel free to tweet at me.